There is a brand new road trip documentary out on Netflix. It's called Will and Harper, and we think everyone needs to watch this. It centers around Will Ferrell, yes, that Will Ferrell, and one of his best friends from his SNL days, Andrew Steele. Over the pandemic, Will receives an email from Andrew saying that he is transitioning to become a woman. He's transitioning to become Harper Steele. They've known each other for like 27 years. And of course, as Harper was transitioning, she wasn't sure what that means to the relationships and the friends in her life. And so she sends out all of these emails to her loved ones in the hope that she would get a positive response. Will was very loving. He responded positively, but he also had an idea. He knew that one of the biggest difficulties that Harper is going to have is encountering America as a trans woman. Now, when Harper was Andrew, he used to love taking road trips. He used to love going to dive bars and, as Will likes to point out, drink a lot of shitty beer. But now, as a trans woman, a lot of those spaces are not going to be as welcoming to Harper. And so Will decides that he and Harper are going to go on a road trip across America from New York to Los Angeles and see what the situation is like and how safe it really is for Harper. The result of which is this absolutely beautiful, surprisingly moving documentary that doesn't shy away from the difficult realities and the difficult questions that come not just with transitioning, but also being the friend of someone who has transitioned. Now, as I was watching this, Bahir, there was one thing that was playing throughout my mind the whole time. And as we reach the third act, Harper addresses it, and I'm like, that's the movie. I'm so glad you've done that. They're sitting at a restaurant, and Harper goes, I realize that I'm incredibly privileged to be on this trip with you because Will Ferrell is a buffer. A camera crew, one of the most famous comedians in the world, is a buffer. It is a luxury that a lot of trans people do not have. And I think with that acknowledgement and what she says after, when she says, despite this privilege, it has still added a layer of safety and security to me, and that I feel more at ease doing it.
Mm.
And I think that was an incredibly important moment because without that, you could brush this aside and go, oh, well, of course it's easy being trans and traveling across America with an A-list movie star and a Netflix crew. What's the big deal? No one's ever going to say anything because they're on TV.
Yeah.
I just thought this was beautifully made. It asks all of the questions that a lot of us have but are afraid to ask. And I think that was the whole idea behind this.
Yeah, and I think the reason for a lot of that comfort is because of the relationship Will and Harper have, right? Even if you had Will Ferrell interview a stranger who is transgendered, you are not going to get the same kind of
No chance.
comfort and relationship and love. I think, like, very early on in the doc, Will Ferrell talks about how this is still the friend that he knew, right? This is still the friend that he grew up with. So being able to ask those silly questions is okay because they've spent 20 plus years together. They've grown up and grown out together. And I think that's what makes this special. And I'm with you. At one point, I thought to myself, yeah, of course, Harper's going to have a good time, right? Because she's protected. She's got Will Ferrell there. And then they do that thing where she goes in by herself. And I have to say that was scary, right? That was like tense. Even sitting here, like, I know a lot of that's probably just documentary editing, but that still felt tense.
But also, there's an acknowledgement that the world is dangerous and that America is dangerous for trans people. But what I think this documentary also brings to light is that its people are not its politics. So you can be in Texas or you can be in Idaho or wherever, and the governor may just have passed a law that is absolutely ridiculous, but it doesn't mean that everyone there is a bad human being. And that on a human to human level, sometimes that connection is important. And I think that's what the documentary sets out to prove, right? A lot of the time, You may make a joke about a trans person, you may be derogatory about a trans person or a gay person, but you may have never met a trans person or a
Yeah.
gay person. And I think it is actually the exact same conversation that happens with Muslims and 9/11.
Yeah.
I remember following 9/11 a few years later, there were all these documentaries of Americans who were incredibly scared of Muslims or derogatory towards Muslims or racist towards Muslims. And then you go, have you ever met a Muslim person? And they're like, no, I haven't. And when they do, and when they have that encounter, it completely changes their perception because we dehumanize the person that we do not know or do not see.
I don't even think it's just a dehumanizing thing. I think it's just the alien. When the leaders of your community, of your country, of your religion, even in some cases, talk about these people as just that, right? Those people, they do these things. It's something we're seeing now, right? President Trump at the debate says Haitians are eating cats and dogs, and that's the story that gets repeated.
Yeah.
And aside from the fact that the people of Springfield, Illinois wanted Haitians to come over, the Haitians are there in the country completely legally because the country needed people to come in, needed immigrants to come in for work. All of that is irrelevant because one dumb orange fuck has said that Haitians eat dogs and cats. Anyway, I think what this show does is, you're right, it humanizes something and someone that people know very little about. So like for me, there's a bit at the middle of the film when they're sitting in Texas, they've had a really bad night out. I don't want to spoil it, but I think Will Ferrell is completely to blame for that night out when they have the 72-ounce steak. And I think like Will Ferrell really fucked up. And he realizes it the next day. And they're just sitting down having a beer, going through tweets. I feel like if those guys have an honest bone in their body and are able to sit themselves down to watch this 2-hour thing, I think they'll be embarrassed of themselves.
For sure.
Because it's easy to react to an image of Will Ferrell with his transgender friend on Facebook or on Twitter. But why don't you sit down and see what your words have done to this person that you've just spent an hour with? You've learned about their hopes and fears and loves and their children. You know their children's names now. When you see that Harper is a real human being, I think those guys will be embarrassed that they sent out those tweets.
What's more, I think the honesty in the approach is possibly the most important thing. A lot of people may not have ill will, but may just be fearful of what they do not understand.
That's one, but I also feel like they've been conditioned and told to react this way to anything about transgenders, right? Will Ferrell comes to Texas with a transgender. Oh, West Coast liberal is here to try and put my son in a dress. No. Fuck you, man. No. Will Ferrell don't give a shit about your son, who is probably out back drinking at 12.
And it's like what you said earlier, because of their good friendship, the honesty to that approach and the way they ask each other questions and talk about it is something that is incredibly important in helping understanding. Because if you just read what's on Twitter and what's on the internet, from both sides, mind you,
Yeah.
it can get incredibly extreme because one side is fighting for their lives and defending who they are, and the other side is attacking them based solely on who they are as individuals. And I feel like this fun, interesting, engaging road trip, bolstered by the fact that it's Will Ferrell, who is incredibly funny, all of that really plays a big factor in you accepting, understanding, and coming to terms with what is going on in the world.
Yeah.
It was really, really fantastic. I really enjoyed this movie. Yet again, I did not know what to expect because Will Ferrell can go either way. And even his comedy goes either way, right? Sometimes he is so extreme that you have no idea if he can handle something like this with the seriousness and the emotion that it requires.
I, for one, think that Will Ferrell was probably the best guy for this because you don't want to approach it like a 60 minutes kind of interview or a 2020 investigation. You want it to be about two friends who are just hanging out. one person asking the other about what that person's going through. For that, I think Will Ferrell was perfect for it because he is innocent enough, he is naive enough in his comedy and in his stories that he is able to put on a pair of Speedos to just make his friend laugh.
Yeah.
You know, because his friend is talking about how she's feeling a little uncomfortable in the swimsuit in a public pool in front of a camera crew, and Will Ferrell pulls out a Speedo. And I think that works. However, I think what happens in Texas is also because it's Will Ferrell.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
the extreme part.
That's the other side of Will Ferrell's innocence, right? To
Who
think
takes
that,
it too far?
yeah, to think that you showing up in a Texas family restaurant, you're wearing your Sherlock Holmes costume, knowing that you're Will Ferrell and everyone's going to be talking to you, looking at you, and essentially putting your friend up to be ridiculed, to be looked at, to be given too much undue attention when maybe just doing what they did before was better, right? Just walking into a dive bar quietly, or like when they went to the stock car races and it was just two guys. It wasn't this, hi, I'm Will Ferrell in costume. Look at me. I'm about to attempt to eat this 72-ounce steak. And oh, by the way, I'm here with my transgender best friend.
But you're right, Bahir. The comedian buddies hanging out is the best approach. The therapist approach wouldn't work. The journalistic approach wouldn't work. That would make it a very different show. And I don't think it would connect to people in the same way.
Yeah, I think because most people would just tune out. They wouldn't watch it. Oh, this isn't for me.
And the way this one's executed just works incredibly well. You really need to watch Will and Harper. We think it's absolutely fantastic. We think it's absolutely essential. It is possibly one of the most accessible works into this subject matter. It's now streaming on Netflix. Check it out. Let us know what you think. You know how to reach out. Goggler MY, all of our social media feeds. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.